Hey, and welcome to another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. I'm your host, I'm Maryanne Dersch. Of course, I help nonprofit leaders master the art of influence so they can ask for and receive all they want, need, and deserve to do their best work and, move the world forward. And if you know me, you probably know that I live in St. Louis, Missouri. And almost a month ago, it's been almost a month now, I can't believe it, we had a devastating tornado come through our city. In fact, it's very, very close to where I live, within a mile of where I live. And a tornado hasn't hit the city of St. Louis proper since 1959. Did I take a little that for granted? Yeah, absolutely, because you never think it's going to hit because it never does. Well, it hit. And oddly enough, it hit in some of the most affluent communities within the city of St. Louis. And I'm talking about the city proper. Side note, a weird thing about St. Louis is our city and our county are separate. So St. Louis County is annexed from St. Louis City. It was a weird decision made hundreds of years ago. And so St. Louis City is its own entity and is not part of a bigger county. And so when I talk about St. Louis City, it is kind of an island in the middle of all these other of St. Louis County. Anyway, so St. Louis City was hit, and it was hit in some of the most affluent parts of the city, mansions with carriage houses that sit along Forest Park and, beautiful homes, and also some of the worst neighborhoods from the city who are already struggling. In St. Louis, we have something called Delmar Boulevard, which we call the Delmar Divide. And during our history of redlining, all the Black people lived north of Delmar, all the white people lived south of Delmar. And as much as we're trying to heal those racial wounds, our community is very much segregated. And most of that tornado went north and hit that north of Delmar, and a lot of neighborhoods that were already struggling. And this cost millions. I think they said $5 billion of damage, like 5,000 homes. And in St. Louis, we have brick homes. We are called Brick City. And almost all these homes are older, probably 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years old. My home is a 3-story brick home, four-sided brick home, built in the 1890s. So this is a lot, and it's really rocked our community, as you can imagine, the devastation and the response. And of course, with the government the way it is right now, federal response has been slow. We just got some FEMA money. I think they passed a bill in the state this week. There's some city money coming from the St. Louis Rams settlement when we had a that's a big old thing I'm not going to get into, our crazy sports divorce, but there's some money floating around. Okay, now you may ask yourself, Maryanne, why are you explaining the tornado to me? Well, the reason I'm explaining the tornado to you is because our city is in crisis, and the conversations that I've been hearing from fundraisers in my community is it okay to ask for money when there are people who are peeing in porta potties and have been for the last month? There are people who have no roofs. There are people who are sleeping in tents outside their house because they literally have nowhere to go. And recovery efforts are very, very slow. And when I say this was devastating, it was devastating. And these older communities, huge trees down, collapsing on buildings. Even the building that I used to work in, I talk a lot about my old employer, 501 Creative. The building they work in was destroyed. Not one other thing I want to say. The tornado was phase one. Phase two came that Monday after, when we got torrential rain. And I'm telling you, like 4 inches of rain within a couple of hours. And so whatever was open to the air was now destroyed from water. So if a third-story building, hey, the roof blew off, no problem. Now the whole building is destroyed because the rain came. If you weren't able to get it tarped off, the rain came and destroyed it, thereby compounding already the devastation. So what is a fundraiser to do? And how and why is it okay, or is it not okay to raise money during a crisis? Because you can feel bad about raising money for your education program, or raising money for animals, or raising money, for diabetes or whatever it is. when there's so much basic need and struggling going on. You can feel really conflicted about asking for donations. What's happening is heartbreaking, and this could be happening in your community because disasters happen and it sucks, and they happen, right? There is not tornadoes, hurricanes, also national disasters. We have a huge problem as I record this in the middle of June, almost the middle of June. We have, there is ice raids happening. Is it okay to ask for money when there are people who are being literally pulled out of elementary schools and locked up? How do we function when there's crisis around us? And this is a perfectly reasonable question to ask. And let's talk about how we're going to deal with that. Okay. Here's the truth. Your mission doesn't stop, and neither do the needs of the people, animals, or communities you serve. We only have needs increase. And I want to, really understand that we can hold space for two things to be true. This is not a zero-sum game, that there are people hurting, right? And there's still other needs that need to be met. I think sometimes there's like arts communities or people like that who think, what do we want art? I'm gonna tell you a little story. I remember during COVID, right, which was like a big crisis that we all went through together. And somebody was they worked for St. Louis and for Forest Park. And she's like, when people can't leave their house, or like we have this worldwide pandemic and people are dying, who wants to talk about the tulips? And I'm like, oh my God, I want to talk about the tulips because the tulips seem more important than ever. The fact that there's still spring and there's life, and you can walk through the park and see the tulips because that was actually a safe thing to do. So what one tragedy doesn't make something else irrelevant. And also, we don't also want to ignore it. And I think there is a balance here that a lot of things can be true at the same time. And we don't have to sacrifice one thing or another, right? Oh, if there's a tornado or a hurricane or some kind of a disaster, then I can't fundraise. So we're going to tap into this. So let's do it. Number one, okay, there's enough compassion to go around. Donors are capable of caring about multiple causes at the same time. In fact, many people even feel more motivated to give because it kind of reminds them what's really important. They're reminded of the fragility of life and the importance of helping others. Your cause may not be part of the immediate disaster relief, but it doesn't make it any less worthy. And I think there's a lot to unpack here because if you can stir up feelings in you of guilt and shame. You feel guilty as if you're taking away resources. And I want to really emphasize here that, again, this is not a zero-sum game and that there is abundance. I just said to you, hey, we're getting federal money, we're getting RAMS money. There's a lot of money that's being funneled to help. Is it coming fast enough? No. Will there be enough? I don't know. And also, whatever you're doing is not less worthy. And in fact, people can want to help the tornado victims, but that does not mean that they are not still wanting to help the folks that they actually help. My husband runs a biotech startup, and a couple of weeks ago, he took his whole team up there, and they spent the whole day volunteering, moving plywood around, and all of that. And there's volunteers that go up every day. But does that, the fact that they did that, that doesn't keep them from doing any of the other activities that they were going to do. And we kind of sometimes default to scarcity that, the world is a pie and a bigger slice has to go to a disaster relief, and that's less money that comes to us. And that's not true. I believe the universe is abundant and that there is plenty of money for whatever we need. And it's okay, and that your donors are capable of caring about multiple things at the same time. And just check where that is coming from, okay? All right. Number two, donors want to help where their heart is. Remember, it's heart, mind, wallet. I have a philosophy called the philanthropic heart, where why people give is about their heart, their lived experience, what's meaningful to them. And people give where they're connected. Some donors will naturally direct their giving to tornado recovery or disaster recovery. and others will continue to support the missions they've cared about. And whether that's, what are you doing? Education, mental health, environment, any other cause. You aren't taking away from anyone by offering donors the opportunity to support your work. They still may want to support your work. And I want you to be careful that number three, you're not making a decision for them. When you ask, you're essentially deciding that your donors don't have when you don't ask, you're saying, oh, they don't have the capacity to give or they don't want to give. But that's really not your decision to make. Your role is to invite, right, with sensitivity and respect and let them decide. And some will say yes and some will not. And that's okay. But they get to decide. That's the empowered choice. Way back in 2007, decades ago, that's so crazy to think about, but decades ago when the housing crisis hit and the economy exploded. And a lot of nonprofits reacted very quickly by cutting out their development and marketing staff pretty quickly because, well, we can't ask people for money now. No, and were there people hurting? Yeah, absolutely. But what those donors experienced wasn't relief of not being asked, it was alienation of not being included. Oh, so all you wanted me for was money, and if I don't have money, I'm not important to you. They felt transactional. And I think the donors wanted to say, oh, I'm not going to ask you for money, or the nonprofits were going to say, I'm not going to ask you for money because it's just not an appropriate time. Where the donors were like, wait, hold on, I get to decide. I'll choose. And your job is to help people make an empowered choice. And that choice could be for them, and that choice could not be, for your cause or not, but they get to make the choice. You're not going to make the choice for them. And a lot of times we're not asking because we're afraid of rejection. So I'm asking you to just go in a little bit deeper and say, what's going on here? Because it could very easily be feelings of rejection, feelings of, like you don't want to experience rejection, you don't want to feel greedy. And because that can stir up feelings of guilt and shame where you're going to hesitate to ask people. And remember, fundraising is a gift, okay? When people give money, they attach to two things that are so needed in times of crisis. That's their power and their purpose. And the power is the assets they have, and their purpose is what they're going to do with them. And you can help people, you know, put their assets where their values lie. And that could be with you or not. And also you're helping them make an empowered decision about what's right for them. And so when you assume that, you're telling them that I'm just going to decide for you. And you've had people decide things for you or decide things, and you're like, wait, it could still even be the right choice, but also I want to make it, right? So make sure you're allowing people to make the empowered choice for themselves. Trust your donors, trust their ability to discern a situation and decide what's right for them. Okay. Number 4, your work right might actually be more needed now. And often when we have a disaster, when we have difficult times, the ripple effects are, housing, trauma, education, and other community needs. Your organization could be maybe addressing issues that are only exacerbated by the crisis. So by fundraising, you're ensuring you can meet your mission fully, especially when demand may be rising and maybe in a way that you hadn't expected, right? So for instance, the YMCA in St. Louis is kind of the center of the service, so yes, the YMCA is in the middle of it because they are kind of a clearinghouse, a center for it. Now the Y is more important than ever, but a lot of those programs that are associated with the Y now are more important than ever, right? Summer camp, because maybe kids need stuff to do and things to eat during the day, that because there's not enough food and there's no air conditioning and things for them to do. So a lot of the things that you do that don't seem connected could actually be connected. I.e., the story I was telling you earlier about the tulips in the park. The tulips felt so secondary, so not important, but actually they could really be important, providing relief from something that felt so awful. If I'm trapped in my house and you're showing me beautiful pictures of tulips, like, oh, thank you so much for sharing that. that was a lovely distraction. And also, number 5, crisis can create context for your mission. Um, you can also connect your mission to the broader reality of the community you're facing. If you're a mental health organization, you talk about, hey, we're rebuilding homes, but we're also rebuilding people's mental health. We're food banks, all of those things, you're going to be impacted, even if indirectly. Even if you're an arts organization, arts bring healing, and we're committed to, we remain committed to that healing. The idea here is to not ignore it. And I think if you can be honest, and I am about honest, authentic, transparent truth telling, right? That's what we do. Is being honest with your donors and saying, hey, we know there's a crisis over here. And we also know that the people we're helping over here still need that help. And that did not change. And also that what we do could now be more important. Animal rescue. There's a lot of displaced dogs and cats now, and people who can no longer care for their pets. And you may want to think about how can you step up and help, how can you step up and help? And also, being honest about, hey, sometimes we feel like, does this really matter? And then we have to be reminded, yes, it does, and here's why. You can, again, remember, we're going to move beyond the polarity of it's either the crisis or us. What does it look like for everyone to get their needs met? We don't have to play the zero-sum game. We can play a game where everyone gets their needs met. And so when we move past the binary and we move to like the third way of taking it all in, of holding space for two things to be true at the same time, that's when possibilities emerge, and that's when creative solutions emerge. The bottom line is fundraising isn't about taking resources. It's about offering an opportunity to make a difference, even and especially when things get dodgy. And also, and I just want to say this as a point of reflection for you to consider is, am I using this crisis as an excuse because I'm afraid of hearing a no? I'm afraid of rejection. And there's a part of me that's being afraid of no or being afraid of rejection. That is not reaching out, because there will always be a reason to not ask. That you can always think of a reason. It was when the political climate settles down, then it's the stock market. Now in St. Louis, it's the tornado. There will always be something external that you can look to and be like, well, I couldn't possibly ask because of this. There will never be perfect conditions. When things settle down, when things get better, that isn't a thing that happens, because we live in life and life is good and bad. It's up and down, right? It's joy and pain. It's all of those things, right? And if you're an organization like a circus, of course we need a circus. And you might consider maybe carving up space for some free tickets for people who are affected by the crisis. You could, maybe do a little more fundraising for them. There's a lot of ways that you can incorporate that and still have the joy of a circus. And I'm thinking about this because St. Louis has, it's called Circus Flora every summer. It's a very big deal. It's a big tent they set up, and you think about like how can you think about a circus when people don't have a home? But it's the circus and it's still joyful. And because there are people hurting doesn't mean there's joy. In fact, there's more of a reason for joy. And again, just to reiterate, thinking about, am I using this crisis, this external thing, as an excuse to not do the real work of asking? And if that's something that may be coming forward for you, that is okay, because really it happens, and it happens a lot to people, and it's all right. It's okay to say, yeah, maybe I am scared. Maybe I am hesitating. Maybe there is some resistance. And if you're answering yes to those questions, please reach out to me. I can help you move through that resistance and move through the world and understand how to show up in the best way possible, no matter the external circumstance, how to have honest, meaningful, transparent conversations with donors in your marketing, in your messaging that actually build communities of support and move people to action, no matter what is going on in the world, because there's always something going on, right? Always. Okay, so that's it for me. Again, fundraising, right? Fundraising isn't about taking, it's about offering an opportunity to make a difference, and it's always a good time to make a difference. Don't ignore it, but don't let it stop you either. And if you have any questions or more thoughts, feel free to email me. All my links are in the show notes. And if you want to really learn to be a powerful fundraiser, no matter what the external circumstance, go ahead and hit that link in the show notes and book a call with me, and we'll talk about what that looks like. And I'll see you next time on The Influential Nonprofit.